Today I'm going to go over the pike press to handstand. Now there's different variations of this. We could do it freestanding, we could do it against the wall, or we could do the L-sit version, so L-sit all the way up to handstand. Now obviously each one of those is a big step up from the one before, but most of them will just be based around the pike press. So the pike press is when we come to tiptoes and then we float up, pass through 7 position, end up in the handstand. Now depending on flexibility, that's going to change dramatically on how it looks and how it's achieved. Now for the freestanding option, we obviously need to have a freestanding handstand. We ideally need to have a strong tuck handstand, and then ideally that 7 position. Now if we don't have the 7 position, we can start to play with it against the wall to condition it. And it just means if we don't have it or we're struggling with the flexibility, we're gonna have to use our shoulders and our strength a bit more earlier on throughout the movement. But it doesn't mean you can't do the pike press. 2 people can get the pike press pretty quickly. People that are strong, especially in the strength of the planche, so they can take their shoulders really far forwards over their hands, and then people who can stack their hips very nicely in a real deep forward fold. So really 2 extremes. Ideally we want to get in a place where we have best of both, and we can do the flexible version where we really stack. So I'm going to try and get my hips directly on top of my hands when I come up. And ideally we can do the strength version where I can take my shoulders past my hands and then open up, and you can hear with the voice that that one uses way more strength. But ideally we can do both, and then we have lots of options. Now the L-sit version is since the hardest. Now actually this version is easier than the floor version. I can't do the floor version. I can't get my feet to slide through. Now even though I've got great flexibility here, so I've got easy enough flexibility to get through, in reality I don't have the compression. I'm too tight in the hips and the thoracic to get through, and I've never really trained it, but I can do it on the elevated surface. Now the cool thing is you can actually train towards the L-sit version, even if you don't have a freestanding hold, even if you don't have the flexibility. It just means we're going to have to elevate the hands in some way, and we're going to have to combine the wall drills and the freestanding version. So you could use things like the steps. Now the wind and the rain is changing dramatically here. It was blue skies a second ago. So let's use 3 different ways of assessing how close we are to the pike press to handstand. First, I'm going to see whether I know the pathway. I'm going to try and jump through the pathway of the pike press. I'm going to bend the knees to get the power of the jump, but then I'm going to straighten the legs before my toes come off, and then I'm going to carry on that momentum through the transition or through the pathway of the pike, pass through the 7 handstand, finishing in the handstand. So bend the knees, straighten, catch at the top. Assessment number 2, can I do an eccentric? So can I start in a handstand, pass through the 7 position as slow and as controlled as possible, and finish up with my toes touching? Now if I couldn't do assessment number 1, I might be able to do this version, the eccentric, but use momentum and come down faster. Ideally it would be an eccentric press, slow and controlled. So starting in the handstand, taking the hips backwards, trying to keep the shoulders open for as long as I can, and then at some point I'm going to need to use the shoulders and the upper back, coming down, kissing the toes to the floor. And assessment number 3, that key to really getting into that press position, is we want to be able to get the hip on top of the hands. Because we're going for a pike, we want to have our legs relatively close together, not too wide like we would in a straddle. So feet close together, and then I'm going to put my hands on the floor, and I'm just going to try and get my hip to be on top of my hands. So video this one from the side and see where your hip comes relative to your hands. So watch my hip, see it's on my top of my feet now. See if I can take it forwards so it gets on top of my hand. At that point, see the toes come off the floor. So you can see how close your hip is to being on top of your hands, to see how close you are to that lift-off position for the pike press. Now obviously if you don't have a freestanding handstand, we need to use the wall or something to stop us, so you could get someone to spot you, but you could go through those 3 assessments. Now obviously assessment number 3 is easy, we don't need the wall, we don't need the balance. But number 1, the jump, we can just use the safety of the wall as we go up, and then use it if needed. And then with the eccentric, we could just kick up. Now our first assessment I would do on here, I wouldn't touch the butt to the wall. I would just see if you can come down through the eccentric, see how controlled it is. Okay, the prerequisites for this one, ideally we would have a freestanding handstand, but it can be against the wall. Ideally we would have a deep, strong tuck. This would ideally, I keep saying ideally, this would ideally have knees at least level with the hip crease. Realistically, you need to get your palms to the floor in a forward fold. Ideally deeper is going to make things easier. Having some sort of planche strength is going to make up for some of that, but also again, it would be a bonus if you had both of those things. And if you want to do the L-sit version, obviously we need an L-sit of some sort. Before you start your training session, obviously warm up the wrists, get the handstand nice and warm, and make sure you've stretched out your calves, your hamstrings, hips, and anything that allows you to get deeper into that forward fold position and thoracic extension. Get on that foam roller or yoga block. Then we can start working the eccentrics. We can do freestanding, would be the ideal, as slow as possible, but if we have any gaps, we need to jump back on the wall and spend some time filling those gaps. So time under tension wherever you fall through the eccentric. So the easiest way to start against the wall is externally rotate, kick up to the wall, and then I'm just going to take all of my back to the wall. So I've got to make sure that my shoulders go with me. What you don't want to do is just take the butt with this one. We want to take the shoulders and the rest of the body to the wall and then come back off. We want to be able to do that. Once we can do that, I can keep the legs straight, and then I'm just going to see how slowly I can go down, pushing into the wall until I get to my tippy toes to the floor. Now, if I come down really fast, I can make that easier by taking the hands further away. The issue with taking the hands further away is now it's really hard on the shoulders and the wrists, but it means that I can come down slow and controlled. Now look, I can go all the way down so I can get tippy toes to touch the floor. But with that one, we are relying a lot on the wall, so I'm leaning really hard against the wall. The harder version, but the better one we want to start to work towards, is where we start in a freestanding handstand, and then we just kiss the butt to the wall. So starting my freestanding handstand, or I could start against the wall and then just come off the wall to get into freestanding. Then I'm going to go butt against the wall, then low back, mid back, upper back, kiss. Now that one's harder because my shoulders aren't going to the wall. It's more about the butt, but it's more realistic to how it feels when you do the real thing. Now the stronger you are in the 7 handstand, the easier the pike press is going to be. So a good way of testing that or conditioning the position is sitting like this. So straightening the legs, see if you can get into an anterior tilt. So if you're tightening the hamstrings or the calves or the hips, you're going to sit more into a posterior position. So we want to try and sit up as much as we can. Now if you are super tight in this position, just use it as an assessment. We want to stretch the hamstrings, stretch the calves, stretch the hips away from this position, then come back into it. You can open up into that position, trying to get your chest open as much as you can. Try and get the biceps by your ears. Now again, if that's really tricky, we need to work on that thoracic extension and shoulder flexion. Now I'm going to place my hands down by my side. This is going to show me where to put my hands when I invert it and put it upside down. So exactly the same, hands here. Step up onto the wall, and then I'm going to walk the feet down, try and get them level with the hips. Trying to push and open the shoulders on top of the hands as best I can. Now that's a great way of assessing and training and conditioning the position if you hold there. Just try and really push back and try and keep the shoulders on top of the hands. If it's impossible, walk the hands out a little bit further. If it's easy, walk the hands a little bit closer to the wall. Now once we have this position, we can start to play with it. I need to take my hands out a little bit more to do the next one. So now we can play with pointing the toes. We can take one leg up. I could try extending the other leg from there. And then I could even play with coming down with 2. Trying to kiss the wall, coming back off. So open and closing only at the hip. Now that's really taking you down towards that 7 position and not really using the shoulders from a press point of view. Now if you're adding the L-sit in, obviously you can do the eccentric of that. Just do the eccentric version of the pike that you're doing, and then jump over to the hand variation that you're using for the eccentric of the L-sit section. So you put them together. If you can and you have it, do it on an elevated surface in one movement. So do the eccentric coming down and then eccentric through to the L-sit. Partial range can be done as the up only. And you could have your feet on the wall, you could have your feet on a box, a chair, the back of the sofa, the dog. Just slowly decrease the height until you can do it off the floor. More time under tension, and if you've got the control on the eccentric, do the eccentric partial range. So come all the way down. In some ways this is a little bit easier because allows you to set up the shoulders and already have all the weight in the hands and the shoulders as you come down. So the toes are already very light, and then you can just kiss the surface and come back up. Starting on the surface is like the other way around. You've already got all the weight in the feet and you need to transfer the weight into the upper back and shoulders. Now with the pike variation, it is possible to do single leg variations with the partial range and the concentrics. but I wouldn't do too much of this. It's a little bit too far away from the real thing. Then we can use momentum in different ways. So I could come all the way through from that L-sit position and try and gather speed so it carries me through the sticking point. So the sticking point is normally where the hips and the shoulders are level with each other. You can rock forwards and back on the floor to try and get your toes to lift off, or you could come out of the bent knee like a jump and just slowly decrease the amount of jump that you're using to help get you up. And remember, all of these can be done on P-bars, boxes, blocks. It's a common one you'll see on people's performances on canes. My working range that still demands some compression is the IKEA steps. You wouldn't believe that was 10 minutes ago. Now look at it. Let me know how you go with this one. Thumbs up and subscribe will be appreciated, and I'll speak to you next time. Thanks, guys.